Welcome to Concerned Citizens Presents. Concerned Citizens of Laguna Woods is an organization dedicated to peace, economic and social justice, good government, and a clean environment. Every month, we invite an expert to enlighten us on a topic related to our mission. Because Village TV videotapes these presentations, we can share that expertise with a larger audience. We hope you enjoy today's broadcast.
I want to move to today's program, which is, as you all know, about the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, right? That's right. That's what you call it. It's really an important issue. It's more important, I think, than people realize. Just a tiny little bit of background. I hope I'm not stepping on what Jonathan wants to say, but the election of 1876, one of the most impactful elections, overlooked, but one of the most impactful elections in American history. It brought in the end of the federal presence in the South, the end of Reconstruction. It's got the pathway for the traitorous Confederate the planters who ruled the South before the Civil War, gave them a means back to power, and it ushered in the Jim Crow era. Very impactful election. Very impactful election. If the Interstate Compact was enforced during that election and adhered to by the states, well, Samuel Tilden, the governor of New York, would have been the president of the United States, not Rutherford B. Hayes, and the dirty deal the Republicans and Democrats made wouldn't have been necessary. And we all know about 2000 when Al Gore received the plurality of popular votes and George Bush was elected president. And I'm pretty sure we all remember 2016 when Hillary Clinton won the election by 3 million votes and Donald Trump was elected president. So this is a very serious issue. And our speaker today, who most of you know, I'm sure, is Jonathan Adler. Jonathan is a long-time member of Concerned Citizens, longtime resident of Laguna Woods. For his background, well, Jonathan was a BA from Harvard and a law degree from Yale. He was a law journal editor at Yale, and he clerked for a California Supreme Court justice. Whenever I think of that, I always think of what John F. Kennedy said when he got honorary degree from Yale. He said, "I now have the best of all possible worlds, a Harvard education and a Yale degree." Jonathan served as a public interest law he's the executive director of the Public Counsel and the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights under the law, the Southern California affiliate. He's a national senior environmental attorney. He's a consultant defense fund. Jonathan also served as a deputy district attorney in Los Angeles County. Since 2007, he has been an elected member of what's called the Central Committee of the Democratic Party of Orange County, which is kind of the board of directors for the Democratic Party of Orange County. He is now the chairman or co-chairman of their legislative committee. Jonathan's been a member of Concerned Citizens since 2003. He's been chairman of the Legislative Action Committee for a long time. He still is with the Democratic Club of Laguna Woods. And he has been working on this particular issue for the last time I asked him, he said 20 years. So we really couldn't find anybody more knowledgeable about this, better qualified to speak about it. And let me get out of here and present Jonathan Adler.
Hi, everybody. So we have an interesting topic to talk about today, the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. Yeah, just a little bit higher. So I'm going to shorthand it sometimes, call it the compact, the agreement, NPVIC. Depends on how much time we have. So nationwide, popular vote, people vote, they're all counted. Interstate, it's an agreement. Compact, there are all kinds of agreements between states for everything like water rights and all kinds of commerce and environment stuff. So that's where it fits. I'd love to try to do a little Socratic stuff, back and forth questions with you. You shout out. we'll have a little fun with this at the outset. On your table, I made a graph. The bullet point, the bullets, the dots, are the states that have ratified the compact. The vertical axis on the left are years, when they did it. Across the bottom, the horizontal axis is the cumulative number of electoral votes. And you'll see pretty soon that that's into effect only if, as and when, the total number of electoral votes of the states that have joined hit at or above a majority of the Electoral College, 270. And the reality is that there's been an awful lot of griping about the Electoral College for 200 years, 200 and more since the framers thought it was a good idea. Reminds me of the saying about the guy who took off all his clothes, the nitwit who took off all his clothes and jumped into the cactus patch, and they asked him why he did it. And he said, well, it seemed like a good idea at the time. And that might be how the Electoral College got started. It seemed like a good idea to have men, white, property owners, wealthy, educated people electing the president, none of this riffraff that we have today. And that's basically, you know, what Hamilton and Madison, Jefferson thought was a good thing at the time of the Constitutional Convention. All right, so here it shows the progress going, you know, up in time and over towards the 270 electoral vote line, at which time the compact goes into effect. The larger context for this is that the Electoral College is one of the things that encourages and permits and causes minority veto and minority rule, frankly. If you know your history well, there was this thing called the Connecticut Compromise in the Constitutional Convention, where the bigger states wanted proportional representation because they'd get more power. So they wanted a House of Representatives. The smaller states wanted equality between states. And Mr. Connecticut, whoever that was, I forget who that was, created the compromise. The Connecticut Compromise was, well, we'll have some from column A and some from column B. So we have a Senate where all the states get equal votes, 2 votes, and a House where it's proportional. The Electoral College combines those two, the 2 senators and the number of representatives. That's the number of electoral votes that the Constitution provides for electing the president. The larger context, though, is, I think we ought to talk about it just for a moment, the encouragement and facilitation of minority rule, minority veto, and minority rule. And there are all kinds of ways. I thought of about 8 different major ways that we have in this country what's become exacerbated by the ultra-partisan split between the parties and empowering the minority. So let's have a little Socratic yell it out what you think is one of those contributing factors. Go ahead.
Okay, so I happen to, this is an issue near and dear.
Just quickly, no talk, just a word, a phrase.
The real problem is winner take all that the states are individually implementing.
Where? In the Electoral College, right? But not just in the Electoral College. So you may or may not know that if there's a tie in the Electoral College, we have what's called a contingent election. It's thrown into the House. This is what the Constitution provides. And the states vote in the House by state. And presently, I think the 26 states delegations are controlled by Republicans. I think 23 by Democrats. I think one is split even. But for sure, electoral votes in most states except 2, it's winner take all. Which are the 2 that are not winner take all? Shout it out. Just shout it out. No hands. Just shout. Nebraska and Maine, that award their electoral votes by winners of the congressional district, plus 2 votes for whoever wins statewide. The other day I calculated what's going to happen. You've seen the polling of the coming presidential election. Calculated what's going to happen if all the states vote the same way they did in 2020, except in 3 battleground states that let's assume that Trump won: Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada. Would you believe that makes the election 271 to 100 to 267, and the thing turns on who wins the district in Maine, which has gone Republican, and the district in Nebraska around Omaha that's gone Democratic. And if they change, it could wind up as a 268, 269 tie, and would go to the House. But let's just talk again. Shout out, what are other causes of anti-democratic minority rule? Citizens United, Supreme Court decision that held that money is speech and corporations are people, and billionaires are allowed to buy elections, and legalizes political bribery. And the more that goes on, the more the wealthier and the bigger the split, and the more that our policy and politics are controlled by money. So that certainly is one of the other causes. All right, another one. What causes minority rule anti-democratic? Gerrymandering. And there was a Supreme Court case, I think 3 or 4 years ago, I think, Rucho versus North Carolina versus Common Cause. Supreme Court said, we are out of the business of hearing claims of political purpose gerrymandering. Supreme Court said, this is a political question. No federal court is going to hear it, get into it, or can rule on it. There are state courts and legislatures that can deal with it, but the federal courts are done with political gerrymandering. And that has, of course, led to, guess what? Political gerrymandering. I won't get into the real refinement of this. They left the Voting Rights Act intact. And the 1965 Voting Rights Act, they said that racial purpose gerrymandering, the federal courts can get into. So, but it turns out that racial and political purposes are very, very similar. So the litigation started, to undo the gerrymandering. They relied on racial grounds, and there was just a case in which I think it was South Carolina, where the defenders of the gerrymander said, "Oh no, we're not doing that." They got rid of a black majority district. They said, "No, we're just doing this for political reasons." So it's kind of flipped, but racial and political seems to line up. Another source and cause of particularly the Senate. Look at the Senate for now. Apart from equal votes per state, large and small, a couple of other aspects of the Senate cause minority veto, minority rule? The filibuster, which has become institutionalized now so that anything requires 60 votes to even get to be heard, to be taken up. It's called a motion to proceed, become automatic. And it's just mushroomed in the last 3 decades, really. As each year goes on, there's more and more filibustering, and there was an effort last year to get rid of it for certain cases, but our friends Senators Sinema and Manchin said no, it brings people together, it makes people compromise. Right, sure it does. 60 votes to proceed. There's another aspect of the Senate. If you're following the news, about 6 or 7 or 8 senators have said they're not going to support any nomination or piece of business now because Donald Trump got such a unfair, rigged trial in New York. So they're going to block everything. Now that's a Senate. There's been a Senate rule. That's another source. Remember this football coach from Alabama who blocked 400 or so military appointments? One person can block a nomination. Senate rules would need to be changed to do away with that. Nominations for military promotions, flag officers, ambassadors, other appointees can be and are blocked by one senator when unanimous consent is required. That really weaponizes the ability of the minority to block and to veto. There have been so another aspect of the anti-democratic tendency is what's been done to the Voting Rights Act itself by the Supreme Court. It's been decimated ever since Shelby County versus Holder. And bit by bit, thanks particularly to Justice Alito, it's been neutered, neutralized, revised, castrated, whatever you want to call it. There's not too much of it that has survived, the Voting Rights Act. And in that has allowed states to engage in voter suppression of various kinds, involving things like how many drop boxes there are going to be, whether felons can vote, the mailing out of cards that require them being returned in order not to be kicked off the voting rolls. It's called caging, and dozens and dozens of other tactics, voter suppression tactics. There is the Supreme Court itself, you may or may not know, is really also one of the kind of become the not only anti-democratic, because that's the nature of a court, but grabbing power away from the other two branches, the Congress, the executive branch, and the states. And they've invented a whole bunch of doctrines, particularly Justices Thomas and Alito, the original intent. If you were at one of the earlier Irwin talks, it was about his book, The Dangerous Fallacy of Original Intent, and this notion of the need for long-standing historic practice. There have been some other manufactured out of thin air doctrines called the major question doctrine, the screwing around with standing. The Supreme Court has become more political and really has, in a bunch of decisions, and abuse of the so-called shadow docket is another one of the sources of that. I want to mention one more thing. Alan, can you, is Alan still here? Where are you? Can I get a picture of, See what we can do. I hope you do it. water in a glass, please. So you have heard about this judge in Amarillo, Texas, named Matthew Kaczmarek, right? Northern District of Texas has all of these one-judge districts, and this is called judge shopping. And they happen to be a bunch of appointees of former President Trump, who are movement radical extremists. No kidding, who have not given up that role. Kaczmarek seems to be the favorite. He set up a cottage industry. They go to him to stop administration policies and programs, and he issues nationwide injunctions. He did another one of those a couple of days ago. That's how the mifepristone case came up. Other judges, similarly in Texas and Louisiana, they've been issuing these nationwide injunctions. One judge enjoins a whole administration program. So I think that's another major contributor to kind of anti-democratic situation that encourages minority rule and minority veto. All right, so let me get quickly now into the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. The way it works is it's an agreement among states that when they join, they commit to cast all of their electoral college votes for the winner of the national popular vote. Need to say something about why it's so hard to amend the Constitution to get rid of the Electoral College. By the way, how many of you have gotten at least one and not more than 100 emails asking you to donate to abolish the Electoral College? Hold up a number of fingers, which is the minimum of, all right, I think I've gotten about 50 or 100 groups emails promising to attack and get rid of the Electoral College. It's a scam. It's a sham. Don't give them money to do that. It's impossible. It's hard enough to amend the Constitution to do something nice, like giving the vote to 18-year-olds, or setting rules for presidential disability, or giving the vote to women, or empowering the income tax. Just think how hard it is when a majority of states like the Electoral College because it gives them more influence even though they have fewer people, and only the big states get anything close to their proportional clout or weight in the Electoral College. You have to have both houses of Congress, each one, pass a constitutional amendment with 2/3 vote. Then it has to be ratified by 3/4 of the states. That ain't going to happen. Shout it out quickly.
Instead of trying to ratify, change, amend the Constitution, can the federal government pass a law
No.
making it illegal for states to incorporate the winner-take-all rule?
No.
If you did that, you could
No.
bypass
The Constitution the Constitution gives the state legislatures plenary authority to decide how their electors are chosen. Article 1, Section 2.
You wouldn't take the state's right to actually conduct the election. You would just basically make it illegal for a winner-take-all. That would eliminate so many problems.
The Constitution prevails over legislation. So
That particular issue is not in the Constitution. The winner-take-all
it is in the sense that the Constitution gives let's not argue about it. I'm telling you that it's kind of understood in Article 1, Section 2 and Article 2, Section 10. And states have plenary authority to decide the method for choosing their electors. So let's not, I'm not going to debate this right now. It's all right. So it's hard enough to amend the Constitution at all. Therefore, some brilliant people, the Amar brothers, con law profs, Akil Amar, Yale Law School, his brother Vikram, brilliant law review article in 2004, 2005. Other commentators developed this proposal, and a dude by the name of John Koza, K-O-Z-A, who had made a fortune in the scratch card lottery game and had been an elector and hated the Electoral College, put it all together. And on February 28th, 2 weeks after my birthday, in 2006, they unveiled the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, NPVIC, the compact, at a press conference in Washington, heavily attended by some prestigious people like Senator Birch Bayh and Shelley Pingree, the president of Common Cause, congressmen. And they started a wonderful campaign to get states to publicize it and to start endorsing it. Maryland became the first state to do so on April 10th, 2007. That's the bottom left dot. By the way, the back side of this, since it was blank, excuse me, I haven't asked you to turn it over yet, but I wrote down some things that occurred to me, which I think have occurred to all of you, and most of them have been named as sources of an anti-democratic minority veto, minority rule situation that we have. One thing we didn't mention is that it's all been greatly exacerbated by ultra-partisanship, which another name for that is negative partisanship, where it's all about, your team winning, and you decide what your policy is by looking at the other side and doing the opposite. So, frankly, I think that the situation has got to be for getting to 270. There are now a total of 17 states in the District of Columbia that have a total cumulative electoral college vote of 209. That's 61 short of 270. There are 4 big states with electoral votes between 10 and 17 that all they need is one more little state to join them and all ratify, and they're up to and over 270. But there has yet to be a Republican governor who has signed anything the legislature has passed or allowed to go into effect. Who is the most famous Republican governor who vetoed a state joining the compact?
Schwarzenegger.
Who?
Schwarzenegger.
I'll be back. It was Arnold. The California legislature passed it, both houses, and Schwarzenegger vetoed it. There's another Republican governor named from Hawaii, named Linda Lingle, I think. Also, they thought it was a bad idea for a president to be elected or for electoral votes to go for their state when a majority of their state had not supported the candidate. Let me mention Gallup polls. There have been a lot of polls, Gallup, Pew, Kaiser Family Foundation. It has always been the case that a majority of the American people have supported doing away with the Electoral College and replacing it with a popular vote. It's always been the case that Democrats were more heavily in favor of abolishing the Electoral College, substituting national popular vote. Republicans, by a large margin, opposed it, and independents were pretty close to Democrats. But to this point, all of those 17 states and the District of Columbia have essentially been blue jurisdictions that have voted Democratic ever since 2014. The problem is that 5 times in our history, the loser of the popular vote has won the Electoral College and been elected president. Twice in the 5 elections between 2000 and 2016, Gore in 2000, Hillary in 2016 won the popular vote. In the 1876 that Alan mentioned, the Tilden-Hayes election, and then 4 elections later, situation also popular vote loser won the Electoral College. That is a pretty direct attack on the notion of democracy. Because I think that the essence of democracy is that, when it comes down to it, a majority is going to prevail, and the losers will cheerfully accept that and move on and try next time. That's the essence. The rule of law, is essential to our commerce, our economy as well. And that's why, democracy is so important to our national interest, our national security, our international situation, and our economy and business, so that the rule of law is stable. So let's see, what else do I want to talk about? How it'll work. I've covered the reasons in support of it. You mentioned winner-take-all laws, which certainly are a problem with the Electoral College. I want to mention kind of a mathematical thing. The argument has been made that if you just have one popular vote and it's really close and it's contested, it's going to cause a big problem. But compared to who? As Henny Youngman used to say when they asked him, "How's your wife?" Compared to who? Compared to state by state, 50 states plus the District of Columbia, it's very likely there's going to be at least one, maybe more, close elections. The mathematical rule is basically the law of large numbers. You may have noticed in polls, the larger the sample of people polled, the smaller the margin of probable error. So the more votes, people, things you have in a collection, the less likely it is that there's going to be a significantly close. You can imagine that if a state had, 100 voters, it's going to be very likely that it's going to be a very close election. So in the contrast is many states, many elections, smaller groups of people, likely contested. The Electoral College is going to be pretty darn close, so it's going to make a difference. When Trump won in 2016, New Hampshire, I think 4,700 and some odd votes would have shifted 4 electoral votes, whereas a shift of 4,000 or 10,000 in California, or a big state, would be like couch change. All right, so the actually statistically, I is statistical analysis. The larger the pool, the less likely it is to be closely contested, and especially with a huge pool nationwide, that is so. The idea of fraud is going to be so much harder to commit fraud with a huge number of people all over the country. So in that regard also, the national popular vote, the compact, is a barrier against a fraud. There's also a policy reason that I'll just mention, then we'll go to questions.
Use the mic.
Well, I haven't said anything. I'm thinking. Who was famous for saying I'm thinking? Jack Benny, when the robber said your money or your life. So there's a good argument that the national popular vote, so let me put it this way. The Electoral College now has half a dozen, maybe 7 swing states or battleground states, right? That's where the bulk of the campaigning is. The money is spent, voters visited, resources put by a huge margin. When you look at the statistics, huge margin goes to a handful of states. That means also that only their local issues and not those of some other state where the outcome is clear are going to be lobbied on, talked about. The national popular vote is going to give every voter exactly the same weight as every other vote. You know, a vote from a rancher in Wyoming is going to count the same as, you know, any of our votes or any urban vote, any suburban vote. So there's that incentive that will, and you know, when the statistics on the turnout rate, this from the 2020 election, in the battleground states was 17 percentage points higher than in the states that were non-competitive. Turnout, much higher in a closely contested election. So in an election where every vote counts, turnout likely will be greater. All right, so those are the kind of now, look, let's focus at least for the time being on pros and cons maybe of the compact, National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, arguments for and against it, at least for a few minutes. If you can, if you will, please come up, come around, be comfortable, sit down, use this mic, and let's have a conversation, okay? If you want to talk about it, unless you really can't, in which case Alan will do something. Hang on a second. Let me ask, is anybody else, come on, come up and talk to me. All right, go ahead. And take the mic.
I have a hypothetical to give you.
Good.
Donald Trump wins the popular vote, but loses the Electoral College. Okay. How long do you think it's going to take the Republicans to see the loophole that I just described and change this law to suit them?
That is a wonderful hypothetical. It's actually a rhetorical question, because when you look at the polling, it seems to vary according to which party has won the presidency. By the way, when the popular vote winner was not elected president, it was always a Republican who won the Electoral College. But when that loses, when it flips, you certainly will see the polling flip.
But you're not answering that question.
I think it's obvious,
You still
haven't I?
think that this loophole isn't something that they won't see, and they can pass a law through Congress, a law, not an amendment, a law through Congress, given the numbers they have.
All right, we're not going to relitigate that one. The Constitution precludes it. But it is interesting. There have been a lot of actually Republican chambers that have passed, ratified the compact. There have been, I think, 17 states in which at least one chamber has passed it. And there are prominent Republicans who say it is, as good an idea for Republicans as it is for Democrats. Hendrik Hertzberg, the New Yorker columnist, has studied this really closely, has come to the conclusion that it doesn't really advantage or favor either party. Nate Silver has done an analysis, come to the same conclusion, that even when there is an advantage to one party in one election, that usually is dissipated by 4 years later when the next one comes along. So they have, and I think other statisticians have come to the conclusion that there really is no systemic, long-lasting, or institutional advantage for either party. Go ahead.
Assume we get the compact approved, or it is approved by a number of states and that votes are there. It's not in the Constitution, but the Electoral College is. So will our current Supreme Court say that it's unconstitutional?
That's an argument. It is claimed there are three legal constitutional claims that are made against the compact. One of them is that one, that the Constitution, by setting up the Electoral College, that clause, that clause, it is argued, precludes any other method. However, states and their legislatures have what is called plenary power to determine how their electors are selected. And SCOTUS has held, and very recently, I think in about 2 years ago, this case called Chiafalo versus, I think, State of Washington, the faithless elector case, in which an elector, decided not to follow the majority in that state and to cast their electoral vote otherwise. Washington and 32 other states have laws that preclude that and prohibit it in one way or another. Some of them actually fine their electors who don't follow it, a little token fine. Others allow that elector to be replaced. But it is up to the state. And by the way, when the Constitution was ratified, there was no popular vote in the states, except in a few of them, for choosing the electors. The electors in the Electoral College were chosen by the state legislature, who, as I mentioned, thought that white, male, property-owning, educated, in the classics, people would do the best job. And the argument has been that that was a purpose of the Electoral College, which has been thoroughly debunked because they have never, Hamilton pretend that the Electoral College was a way for these wise people to get rid of unfit candidates. Has never happened. And the Supreme Court has said that states can deal with their faithless elector any way they like. The 12th Amendment, in I think 1804 or something like that, required, or maybe it's a little bit later, required a popular vote to choose the electors. But the clause says that legislatures may choose any way to do so. And as we know, Maine and Nebraska have chosen to do so by congressional district. And in Nebraska, around Omaha, there's a stubbornly Democratic district, and up in Maine, in rural northern Maine, there's a stubbornly Republican district in a majority Democratic state. That's the way they've chosen to do it. And there's an argument based on the so-called compact clause of the Constitution that deals with and authorizes interstate agreements. But I really don't want to get into legal objections and constitutional objections, because most authorities, most scholars and observers are perfectly content that it is constitutional and it will pass muster. The problem is now political, that it still needs 61 votes, and there are no trifecta blue states or even Democratic-controlled legislatures and or a Democratic governor with enough total electoral votes to get over get 2 or over 270, needing 61. And I think with increasing polarization, that's looking a little bit even more unlikely now and will for the next few years than previously. Who else wants to talk? Pat.
Over the last 2 centuries, we've had Americans that have worked hard to hone and protect in securing our vote with the Electoral College being part of it, and it was carefully and thoughtfully strategized, and is now part of our U.S. Constitution. What makes you and I respectfully ask, what makes you and the other authors of the NPV think you're wiser than all that brain trust? That's my question.
Because the Constitution lets us be. Or at least argue that we can if we can convince others, and if we can convince a state legislature and the governor to sign on, you know, we're perfectly free to advocate for it. I think the strongest argument for it is this broadening out of the electorate, the encouragement of turnout, the candidates going into all the places, the cities, the rural places, the states, where the outcome, where it's so non-competitive that they usually don't bother. But every vote will count the same in any part of the country as another. They will be talked to, engaged, listened to, their issues will be dealt with. The Electoral College obviously, clearly, has 6, maybe 7 so-called swing or battleground states. And that's why a majority of the money, resources, TV advertising, visits, any measure has the candidates competing in those battleground states. And you know as well as I do, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, and maybe North Carolina. And if you're a campaign manager, that makes sense. You don't want to waste money campaigning. If you're a Democrat, you don't want to waste your money campaigning in a heavily blue, obviously blue state. And if you're a Republican, you don't want to drive around Wyoming, you know, rounding up all of the votes that are sure to come that way. That, I think, is the strongest argument for it, apart from the fact that just pure, sheer democracy, majority wins. Minority rule, minority veto ain't a good idea. Those are probably, you know, among the strongest. Somebody else. Anybody else?
Me.
Alan.
I have a question.
Alan Feldman.
There you go.
Back off the mic a little bit. Okay, go ahead.
There we go. Actually, I want to say also, I disagree with you slightly when you talked about the formation of the Electoral College, because the way I see the Constitutional Convention is the 2 things that our founding fathers were most absolutely
Now you can talk more into it.
petrified of were monarchy and democracy. They didn't want either of any of them. They wanted to make the decisions, and that's why the Constitution has so many safeguards against other people voting. That's just an opinion. That's not. But anyway, that's not my question. My question is, if this passes and is enshrined in law, what is to stop one of the states from saying, well, I'm not going to go along? What's going to stop them from backing out?
Fine question. Alan is talking about withdrawal. And there is, and that's part of the provision of the agreement, is that a state can withdraw from it. There are many ways where the compact can go into effect because it got all the votes and then fall back down below it. For example, another state is added to the union. Reapportionment census every 10 years. Reapportionment. There are 3 states that have lost an electoral vote from the 2020 census: California, New York, and I think Illinois maybe. And 2 states have added, Oregon and, well, Texas, I'm sorry, there are 2 blue states that have added one. One is Oregon, the other is, I think, I forget, but Texas has added 2, Florida has added 2. So anyway, it changes, and you know, a ratifying state can lose an electoral vote. But yes, there is a provision where states can withdraw. I think that they wouldn't get them to commit if there were no way to withdraw. And there are a lot of states that have tried to withdraw. Are you coming up to talk? Yes. All right, Alan, give up your chair. And states have tried to withdraw. Wait a second, sit down for the time being. You'll understand when it's your time, when I've stopped talking. That's good. Okay. There have been referenda to withdraw that have failed. There have been efforts to withdraw that have failed, but it's perfectly allowed, and I would anticipate that in this current polarized political environment, when there's 1 or 2 elections where the winner is not the winner of within a state, that there'll be a big demand to get the heck out of the compact. Pat, you want to?
Yeah, it's also a book written by
Seconds.
Eric with Texas. Yeah, I wanted to just to respond to your argument about if we had NPV, it'd be more people voting.
National popular vote, if we had NPV.
We had that. But that's what Tara Ross, one of our arguments is. At first, the founding fathers, they feared the tyranny of the majority. So say we do get the NPV, Jonathan, and all the big states are the ones that are pulling in and electing presidents. But what about the Midwest and all those small states? That's kind of the argument, Can you address that?
No, but the states can.
And that's why it goes back to the states, right?
Hawaii joined in 08, 4 electoral votes. DC, 3. Vermont, 3. California, Rhode Island, 4. The number of electoral votes of states that have joined. Not worried about that issue. Connecticut, 7. But, their 7 are much wealthier than anybody else. But that's a joke. Delaware, 3. New Mexico, 5. Maine, 4. So the smaller states are really not worried because, again, everybody's vote counts the same. And it is, that's what popular vote means. So, yes, a state that wants to maintain its excess weight and authority is not going to like it because the smallest states have the greatest proportional weight compared to the big states. Wyoming has, well, three electoral votes. Just trying to remember their population. I think it's 570,000 something. Back at the time of the framing, the difference between the largest state and the smallest state was 7.5 to 1. Difference between California and Wyoming now is 68.5 to 1 in population ratio, but California has 55 electoral votes, Wyoming has 3. So Wyoming has 3.5 times, each voter in Wyoming has 3.5 times the power of a voter in a New York or a Texas or a New York or in Illinois or a big state. So they have a good deal, a sweet deal with the Electoral College because their voters get more clout proportionally. But small states, there's probably an equal number of small states and large states that have come in. As far as, yes, you referenced the framers not trusting the riffraff, democracy.
Tyranny of the majority.
What?
They call it the tyranny of the majority.
Well, that's why they created the Electoral College in the first place and excluded, riffraff, like non-property
They
owners.
don't call it riffraff.
No, I'm calling it riffraff, but you and I know that they thought it was riffraff.
I don't know that.
Well, look,
Also a lot of pressure from the slave states, because when a person wasn't considered a full person, then there was.
all right, so you just raised the 3/5 rule.
Yeah, it was born in, so it was born in sin. I don't know, that doesn't negate everything you said, but I'm just saying.
Bringing up the 3/5 rule for the slave states. By the way, most people get confused when you mention the 3/5 rule, as if it were very ungenerous to the slaves to call them only 3/5 of a person. It's actually the reverse. They wanted to count as many of their slaves as possible because that would give them more representation in the House. So it was the northern states that were saying, no, you can't count your slaves, and the southern states said, we want to count all our slaves, and 3/5 was the compromise to give them more power in the House. But the question was, what were the founders thinking? Well, you just have to channel them. You have to channel Madison,
We look at the
Franklin.
documents, we look at the Constitution.
Yeah, and you're perfectly right that they feared the tyranny of the majority. We've come a long way since then in extending the franchise, the right to vote, participation, and all that. So
Lastly, Alan, can you give us a definition?
there you go again.
Oh, my God.
You just forfeited it.
Forgive me.
But-
Forgive my question.
But I wanted to end. I want to turn it over, Pat. So thank me for coming and speaking.
Thank you, Jonathan, for coming.
You're welcome.
And I
Have a
want to ask
wonderful
if you
day.
would clarify, as a legal scholar you are, the difference between a democracy and a republic.
That's not a legal issue. That's a political philosopher's issue. And the best, and I've researched it, I've looked deeply into it, and the best I can make out is that they are coming closer together. Republic is a more formal statement of the form of government. Democratic, autocracy means who governs, who controls, and all of the things that flow out of that. But I think that these days those differences are getting blurred, shall we say.
There's no more questions, so I want to thank Jonathan very much for researching and doing this today. Thank everybody for being here.